Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben, and a couple days ago I put out the most recent video in the DR650 Adventure build series where we mounted this windshield and GPS bar with the CarPride W702 Pro CarPlay unit on the back side of it. Had a really great time getting out and testing that bike, and I'm definitely glad that I made these mods, and I'm excited to continue working on it. But I got a great question on that video down in the comments section here. So it says, out of the DR, the XR, and the 701, which one would be best for long range on the highway? Now, for those of you who have been watching for a long time, you know that this whole build series with the XR and the DR essentially got started because prior to these machines, I had been riding a Gen 2 and a Gen 3 KLR650. So before we talk about the XR, the DR, and the 701, I want to jump back 2 years ago to when I just got the Gen 3 KLR and see how I felt about that bike out on the high-speed paved roads.
This bike is definitely still an enjoyable machine to ride, but you definitely have to have the expectation that it's a KLR. It's a single cylinder, it makes 40 horsepower, and it weighs 460 pounds. So it's not going to be a sport bike. You do often run out of gas. But hey, I mean, it's still a motorcycle, and I've got to say it is definitely more fun, even just on these county roads, than the TW200. I've taken that out a few times, and that one definitely leaves a lot to be desired in the corners, where this one, I don't know, I mean, it still feels like you're on a bike that has a little bit of power. As far as the wind protection goes, and it is a nice windy day, you guys may have already heard a bit of the wind noise. I do wear earplugs all the time when I ride this bike. The windscreen at my size anyways, 5'10", 31-inch inseam height, pretty much shoots the wind right at kind of my windshield on my helmet, and that's not exactly a great experience, especially with an open visor. I suppose I probably should mention that I do have the D-Sport Adventure tires on here, which are not a tire that I would recommend for the highway at all. They definitely make the ride a little bit wild, even overinflated like they are. So definitely more than enough acceleration to get you up to highway speeds, and you're not going to feel like you're unable to keep up with traffic, but throwing it down into fourth gear and trying to pass a vehicle, again, it's a KLR, it's not a sport bike. 70 indicated on the GPS unit. The seat is buzzing. If I put my knees on the tank is buzzing. With the Tusk Chub bar on here and the bar and weights on the Barkbusters, I get just a little bit of vibration in the handlebars. It's not unnoticeable, but it's not annoying either.
Now, I'm kind of surprised that I didn't come right out and say it, but I suppose what I was alluding to talking about the vibrations of the tank and the seat and that sort of thing is the fact that at this speed, the KLR is running around 5,500 RPM, and most KLR riders would agree, I think, that that feels like a shift point, something that you would be ready for the next gear at, and of course, there just isn't one because the KLR only has 5 gears.
And as far as the brakes go on here, they're not great. I've definitely done some hardcore testing with them, and if you slam on both of them sort of equally, the back tire locks up super easy. I actually maybe have got the front tire to lock up a little bit with the D-Sports on here, which, again, these are not a great tire for stopping on a dime. So I've been on the bike for, I guess, maybe 20 minutes so far now, and the seat is almost starting to get a little bit uncomfortable. It's pillowy, it's soft, it's squishy, and it's not really nice to sit on for more than like a half an hour. I mean, you can do it for an hour or 2 hours. I've done it, but it will kind of start to pull on you, and I don't know, you just sink into it, and it's just not really as good as you think it would be when you initially sit down on it.
Now, of course, that could have easily been fixed with a seat concept seat, which is what the rest of the bikes in my garage right now have on them. Beyond that, though, the KLR definitely feels much more like an adventure bike. The seating position is seemingly much more designed for comfort than any intense off-road riding like the other three bikes that I have, which definitely make you feel like you're sitting on a dirt bike.
And of course, the other really nice thing about the KLR is if you're in town running some errands and you end up with a little bit of a downpour on the way back home, you've got all of this nice rain protection, being all the plastics and everything up front. I think a lot of people think that the KLR is just sort of dressed up like an adventure bike, and I guess in a sense, I mean, it is, but it's that way for a reason, because when you get stuck in the rain, you have a nice wind block and a nice rain block.
And while the front tire still does splash a bit of water up onto your pants and boots, I do think that this is one thing that I'm just not going to be able to replicate on the other machines. As much as a windshield can help and as much as a larger tank can help, there really just is no substitute for a full fairing like this.
You do tend to get blown around a bit when it's a little windy and when you're passing trucks on the highway or when trucks are passing you. So you gotta kind of be mindful of that and kind of get used to it before you're riding in a lot of heavy traffic. But the nice thing about the KLR, as much as people give it crap for being a little hefty for an off-road bike and for being a 650 and for the amount of power it has, that 460 pounds definitely helps you feel a lot more solid on the pavement, especially at higher speeds. Definitely feels a lot more like it belongs here. As soon as you take that weight off-road, well, then it maybe feels a little bit less at home than those would.
Which is precisely why I traded the KLR for the DR650 and purchased the XR650. But of course, when I first acquired them, they had very little in the way of wind protection, at least in comparison to the KLR. So let's see what I thought of them at first out on the high-speed roads.
Blowing us around now. Uh-oh, there's a little bit of rain. About 70 indicated on the dash. You can definitely say that I would be much more comfortable out here on a bike like the KLR, but of course without any wind protection, it's kind of hard to expect anything else. I don't really think that this is the goal of most people that are going to buy this type of bike, but that being said, I think it definitely is possible and not something that I would specifically try to avoid. I'll bet a lot of what I like about this bike as far as the power delivery goes and the feeling that it gives you is because of the lack of cush drive, which is kind of interesting. I never really thought that I would see that as a positive, and of course it's not really the best thing for longevity of any of the components, but it does make for an interesting feeling. Let's do a brake check here from the first white thing to the second. Ooh, don't want to lose it on the new tires. Yeah, definitely has more than enough stopping power. Yeah, I can hear that front starting to slide a little bit. Seems like depending on what gear you're in, you definitely can pick up some vibrations here and there, both kind of on like the low end if you're lugging it, of course, and a little bit on the top end when it kind of comes time to shift. But for the majority of the ride, it's honestly not nearly as vibey, I guess, or as brappy as you would think a giant single cylinder bike would be. It's really just in general kind of a nice bike to ride.
Now let's hop on the DR and see how that feels in comparison.
Well, the foot pegs definitely move around a heck of a lot more on here. I kind of wonder if I get rid of the rubber isolation, if that'll help. I almost want to say it did seem like this thing got up to 70 a little bit more effortlessly.
And even though I was riding into the wind on both of these test rides, both of these bikes definitely feel like they're sort of geared for this type of riding more so than the KLR, which is odd as the aesthetics would certainly make you assume otherwise.
I think I do feel better on this bike on the highway in general though, even as windy as it is, or I guess maybe because it's so windy. I just feel better being closer to the ground, I think, and there probably is just no way around that.
That is, of course, unless you're willing to lower the XR, which, don't worry, we will talk about a bit later on in the video.
If you're looking for the ground clearance, the XR is obviously the clear option. If you're looking for something that is going to make you feel a little bit safer and a little bit closer to the ground when you're learning off-road or even just on the pavement. I mean, I think, you know, obviously then the decision is pretty clear. I gotta do my brake test here. Ready, go. Ooh, yep. Ooh, dragged the rear a bit there. The XR, I think probably partially because of the lack of squishy suspension, definitely feels like it stops better and faster. The vibrations through everything, the longer I'm on it, the more I kind of forget. And that's why I think, you know, the first couple times that I was on them kind of separated from each other by, you know, a couple days or whatever, it wasn't nearly as noticeable. This bike definitely turns in and handles and takes corners on the pavement, and even just kind of does this. I mean, so much better though. That definitely is still very noticeable. But back to the vibrations though, this thing, I mean, you forget pretty quick how different they feel as far as, you know, the little bit of maybe not nice input that you get from the bars and the seat and whatever. Now that I'm thinking about it a bit, I mean, I can feel the seat vibrating a little bit, and you know, things do get a little choppy when, like I said, when you're on the throttle. But it's not something that I think I would say is enough of a reason to put into your consideration between the two.
Now let's park the DR and leave the dinosaurs in the garage, and we'll take out the Husqvarna 701 Enduro.
Both the DR and the XR, the very first time that I took them up to highway speeds or something close to it, I was super impressed, because I didn't think that anything in a single cylinder, Thumper anyway, could be nearly as good on the highway as this bike right here.
And that's because on the 701 at 72 miles an hour, I basically just shifted into 6th gear, where the other machines only have 5 speeds. So on this bike, I'm feeling like I have plenty of power left to accelerate, and that also contributes to the bike feeling, well, a little bit more calm at these speeds.
This bike is probably smoother than either the DR or the XR. A little bit of a buzz in the handlebars, but it almost kind of smooths out a bit at this speed.
And if you guys are unfamiliar with my 701, the previous owner did have it lowered professionally 2.5 inches, and I think that definitely contributes to the bike's road and highway manners.
In general, a very, very friendly bike to ride on the highway. Super capable, feels super solid. I would not hesitate to ride this bike on the road for a long time, keeping in mind that it is still a single cylinder. And now it's about time for a brake check here right now. Ooh, yeah, this thing definitely has more than enough stopping power. This is just a high performance machine. If you're gonna go fast, you gotta be able to stop fast too.
It's also the only bike out of the 3 to feature ABS, which is adjustable and works so well that I never feel the need to turn it off regardless of where I'm riding.
I really do like the ABS on here. I wish all bikes were like that, where it's just front, because I mean, really off-road, you don't want to lock the front up, you know? I mean, if you do, it's usually on accident.
And it's always only the back brake that you want to, the back end that you want to slide around and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be able to make the back slide when you need it to for course correction, and the front, I mean, likewise, you don't ever really want it to slip. You want it to be able to be there to catch you if you mess up.
Another thing that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that this windshield that you're seeing on the bike is actually from a KTM 690 and was sort of retrofitted on here by the previous owner. It doesn't do a whole lot in the way of wind protection, but does seem to keep the wind off my chest a bit, which is certainly nice.
I have kind of gotten it into my head that it is less reliable, but I mean, just because some of these bikes are unreliable, it doesn't mean all of them are going to be. It doesn't mean anything is going to go wrong with mine. But, I mean, I think it is something you do kind of have to take into consideration.
With the stock benchmark testing out of the way, I could finally get to work on modifying the XR, and of course, the first order of business was a bit more wind protection. For that, I went with the Hemisphere Off-Road Rally Windshield, which also provided a great spot for the CarPride W702 navigation unit, and with both of those in place, it was time to head out for another test ride.
So we are sort of going with the wind, now maybe against it a little bit, so of course that will change things. Creeping up on 70 indicated on the dash. We get blown around a little bit, but boy, I feel almost nothing on my chest. A little tiny bit on my shoulders, but not really much, and a bit on the upper portion of the helmet. I'm not really protected as far as the peak and the visor goes, so when I go to check, it could still kind of get caught by the wind. But man, it's really not bad, and I think, let's see, we're doing 70. Yeah, I mean, there's, again, pretty darn nice dead airspace pocket from there to there. A little bit of buffeting, but I mean, it's nice and clean. Otherwise, of course, from the tank up to somewhere about here, it's just, I mean, there's just about that much buffeting, and then it's just clean air. It's amazing. Ooh, that was weird. If I stand up on the highway, she gets a little wobbly. That's weird. It's putting a little bit too much weight up high, I guess. Man, this is much better than I expected. It's quiet in this helmet, and I mean, like I said, I got earplugs on, but that doesn't really make too much of a difference if you get a lot of buffeting. And I should clarify that what I mean by quiet is quiet for riding on the highway with a helmet that's not super quiet and with a 90s dirt bike.
And then in hopes of reducing that sort of top-heavy, awkward dirt bike feeling, I dropped the front of the bike on the fork tubes, which came out to about a 3/4 inch reduction in height in the front, and I used the Hemisphere Off-Road adjustable lowering link in the back to drop the back half about an inch. And for you guys that have been watching, you know that this was definitely something that I was pretty hesitant about, as I sure do enjoy my ground clearance, but we still ended up with over 12 inches of ground clearance, which is still much more than the other two bikes, definitely more than the KLR. And again, if you guys have been watching the videos, you know this ended up being probably one of my favorite mods for this bike. It just made it feel so much better off the road, and on the road, well, let's see for ourselves.
So 75 indicated on the dash, probably more like 70. In reality, just sitting here kind of up against the tank, feeling, I would say, pretty good. If we have to do some lane changing or want to drift around in our lane a little bit, boy, that does not feel like a giant motorcycle that's not meant to be on the freeway anymore. It just feels like a motorcycle. I am noticing that I have to put a lot more input on the bars to get the bike to lean over, where I think before I could just kind of lean, and I suppose it sort of still will follow, but it doesn't seem like it leans as much. Yeah, certainly no ill effects yet. After the truck passes here, I will give the bars a little bit of a shake just to sort of replicate some amount of move. So I guess we'll just do it. We'll do a quick lane change. Yeah, there's maybe a little bit of dancing going on there. If I give the bars a little bit of input. You see me here? I hate riding around people. Yeah, if I accidentally kind of over-exaggerate my shift and give the bars a little bit too much input when I'm doing the clutch, I mean, it does break loose a little bit and start to wobble, but I mean, I'm doing, like I said, 75 indicated on the dash, so that's kind of going to happen on just about any dual sport. Definitely enjoying my wind protection, that's for sure. And the nice part about having that seat a little bit flatter is I can sort of scoot to the back a bit and not be so high up in the air, so I can actually hide behind my shield, which is definitely more comfortable from a wind protection standpoint. Slide in behind Grandma here, and I'll slow it down to 70 indicated. And now, how about a little bit of a wiggle? Stuck back on the back of the seat like this, it brings itself in line real quick. What if I scoot forward? Which really, that is where your weight should be. Oh yeah, the further I go forward, then it really wants to dance. So yeah, as long as I'm sitting on the back, I mean, it's way more stable. Yeah, definitely. So I would say you definitely want to be sitting on the back, and if the seat is angled like that, that makes it hard to do. So man, there's just one more positive. This bike is even more comfy now on the highway because of this. I like this.
After those first few mods were sorted on the XR, I decided to move on to the DR. On this bike, I went with a somewhat universal windshield/GPS bar that I mounted the sort of upgraded version to the Car Pride unit. This is the W702 Pro, which has a few more features. I fitted that all to the bike and then took it out for a very nice long test ride on the Harrison Hills ATV trails. And after that, I hit the pavement for a bit of a ride at somewhere around 60 miles an hour.
I've got to say, as nice as a KLR can be for, as I've always said, even back when I owned one, the right type of person, the DR650 for me personally, I mean, it's just a much better bike for what I want it to do, which is, you know, rip around off-road, you know, it kind of be a hooligan off-road, honestly, yet still pretty darn comfy on-road. I do have a seat concept seat on here. You know, I've got the bars raised up, the less swept back bars. Of course, my wind protection that, I mean, gives me just a beautiful, clean air pocket at the speed limit here, 60 miles an hour. The wind hits me. There's a little bit of buffeting right here, clean, buffeted, and it's hitting me kind of at eye level. And then there's clean air above that, and it's really, the buffeting isn't too bad. It's clear from there to there, and it's even a little bit bigger down at the bottom. I mean, it's beautiful, and I can kind of hunker down behind it, and then it's getting shot kind of over my head, basically, just right at the kind of the peak of the helmet. And I'll be quiet, and maybe you guys can hear the wind difference. I'll do it with the shield closed. So then that's completely free air. We'll do it with the visor open. So that's about where I want to ride, which I anticipate is probably pretty annoying for you guys. That's pretty much straight back, which is probably even worse. And that's clean air.
Now, of course, on-road performance and comfort are extremely important when you're putting long hours in on the freeway, but if you are going to spend a lot of time on the seat, you're inevitably going to spend, well, some amount of time at the fuel station, and back when I had the Gen 3 KLR, I spent the least amount of time filling that bike up in comparison to the rest, because the tank size is, well, double that of most of the rest of these bikes, and at about 50 miles to the gallon, if you multiply that by the 6-gallon tank, you end up with, well, an almost 300-mile range, which I do have to say was pretty darn nice. On the opposite end of that spectrum is the Honda XR650L. When I first brought the bike home, it still had the plastic 4.7-gallon Clark tank that the previous owner had fitted. He told me that he was getting somewhere around only 35 miles to the gallon, but because the bike came with the stock 2.8-gallon tank, I decided to put it back on and do my own range testing, which, well, didn't turn out all that well.
Wow. 74 miles to reserve. Oh no.
And as disappointing as that was in comparison to the KLR's 300-mile range especially, I still knew that we had a bit of fuel left on the reserve, so I flipped it over and headed to the gas station to see just how bad the fuel mileage actually was.
So what are we at? 1.95 gallons. So definitely could have got a bit more out of that. So 85.2 divided by 1.951. More than 43.5 miles to the gallon? That's not bad. That beats 35 any day.
Next in line for poor range is the mighty DR650 with its slightly larger 3.4-gallon tank. After I topped that off, we took the same exact ride I'd had the XR on during the initial fuel mileage and range testing. Did a little bit of on-road, a little bit of off-road, and then headed back to the gas station to see just what the DR got for MPG.
Now we're coming up on the spot that I would have hit 74 miles and had to flip to reserve last time. Looks like we're only at about 68 on this. Must have goofed around on the road a little bit more on the way there last time. Honestly, I probably won't even have to flip it to reserve on this trip. Pretty sure you can get over 100 miles to the tank on this thing. I guess I'll stop, fill it up, and check the mileage anyway though. So what do we end up with? 78.4. Let's fill her up. I believe that's about where she was. $6.71 for all that fun. Well worth it. 78.4 divided by 1.561. 50 miles to the gallon, so 4 or 5 better than the XR. Can't complain about that.
I do, however, have a bike that can beat it, which is, of course, the 701 Enduro, and while it does have the exact same 3.4 gallon capacity, albeit in a very different location, the 701 gets somewhere around 55 to 60 miles to the gallon, meaning that if you rode it really gingerly, you might be able to squeak close to 200 miles out of the tank. And while that certainly isn't KLR numbers, considering the fact that this bike makes almost double the horsepower of the rest, I think it really is pretty impressive. Especially considering that those numbers almost exactly match that of the only real adventure bike that I've ever owned, which is the 2021 Tenere 700. That being said, though, if you start to look at the service intervals, well, it seems like maybe an adventure bike would be the way to go.
Service intervals, at least for the valves anyways, are probably gonna be the longest on this bike in comparison to anything else. The XR is kind of comically often. The DR, you have to do fairly often, and the 701, I think, is kind of the same.
Now, I'm certainly not a motorcycle mechanic and would always suggest seeking out the assistance and expertise of a certified professional, but it seems like, in my experience anyways, most of them would concur that the oil change service intervals listed in the majority of these motorcycles are, well, a lot longer than you should probably go between oil changes. Now, I've also found that most sight glasses and dipsticks tend to contradict what's printed in an owner's manual as far as oil capacity goes. I would say it is definitely worth at least taking these numbers into consideration, as they should give you some sort of real-world idea of how often the oil needs to be changed in each one of these motorcycles. So starting off with the KLR650, the manual recommends somewhere over 7,000 miles between changes, and that bike supposedly can take up to 2.6 quarts. The DR650 recommends 3,500 miles between changes, and that is on anywhere from 2.4 to 2.7 quarts. And on one end, you're just changing the oil. The other end, you're doing a complete overhaul. The XR650L only shows 2,000 miles between oil changes, which maybe is a number that I will actually follow. That bike only takes somewhere between 2 and 2.4 quarts, depending, again, what you're doing. And the Husqvarna 701 actually takes the least amount of oil, 1.8 quarts, yet it says that it can go 6,200 miles between oil changes. There are a few other specs and features that I think are worth taking into consideration, like the fact that the Kawasaki KLR650 and the Husqvarna 701 Enduro are the only two that have actual liquid cooling. The DR650 does have an oil cooler and also uses cooling fins to keep temperatures in check, whereas the XR650 only has the somewhat archaic now at this point cooling fins to cool it down. You can fit an aftermarket oil cooler to the bike, as many riders do. However, the XR is also the only bike in this lineup that does not come equipped with a cush drive, which is essentially just some little rubber isolators that sort of separate the drive chain from the rear axle. Now, like I said earlier in the video, this actually sort of makes the bike feel a bit more responsive and is something that I've really come to like, but that being said, it definitely will reduce the life of your chain and sprockets. So if you're going to be putting on a lot of high miles, you may want to upgrade to an aftermarket hub with a cush drive. So if we take all that into consideration, I would say that the DR650 probably seems like the clear winner, which is what I've pretty much been saying this entire time. It's just the best sort of middle ground bike. It has longevity going for it. It has the oil cooler. It's got the cush drive. And it just is a very good all-around motorcycle. It's not super great at anything, but it's light, it's capable, it's still plenty capable of doing highway speeds. I did just finally fit a 14-tooth sprocket on that bike, and I will get out and do some testing, hopefully later this week, at some higher speeds on some longer rides on the freeway. So definitely be looking forward to that. I think the rest are all great machines, and I think the best thing to do is to take into consideration all of the different aspects and features, positives and negatives of really any motorcycle, and then sort of compare and contrast that with your own ambitions and the type of riding that you have in your area and how long it's going to take you to get to that area to ride. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, stay swanky, get out and enjoy this beautiful world God created for us any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime.
Tornado.